Hey everybody, welcome back to the Flicks the Church Forgot, where I am Peter Laws, and I have been romping through some of my paperbacks from hell in honor of Grady Hendrix's fantastic book on the twisted fiction, horror fiction of the 70s and 80s. So, the first episode explored all the Amityville stories and Friday the 13th, Incredible Melting Man, and all these other cool things. But for now, we're going to continue our little romp by looking at what we got here. Oh yeah. I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. This is just like a classic and a great book. The cover, I quite like that cover art on there. Have a check that out. But obviously it's a bit of a more modern version of it, so I prefer the older retro versions, but the picture's pretty cool. But anyway, you'll be aware of this book. You may have read it already, or if you haven't read it, then you would have at least seen films based on it. The Omega Man with Charlton Heston, I Am Legend with Will Smith, which was a bit meh, and The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. But it's a really great vampire novel about Robert Neville, this guy who basically is the last survivor of this horrendous plague, and as he sits at home at night, there are these creepy sort of vampires just calling out his name, Neville, outside his house. It's really good. And the vampires in this, they feel scary. Plague vampires, I'm not quite sure what you would call them, but they feel scary. They're not like the Will Smith film where they're kind of these CGI, white things. I don't know what they were. It's a very well-written book. Richard Matheson's an excellent author who's behind so many amazing Twilight Zone episodes and more. I really loved his book Hell House as well, which is a great book worth reading. But yeah, this was the influence. This book, a direct influence on George Romero when he was making Night of the Living Dead, and you can tell when you read it that in many ways, and Romero has said this, that he kind of just swaps out the plague vampires in this for zombies or ghouls, I should say, instead. And you really get that vibe of somebody basically holding up inside a building while the whole world has become ravenous, wanting an inhuman wanting you. That's basically the essential idea behind the zombie story, and you see it here. So check it out. Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, really good book. And very poignant too at times. I'm sure I filled up a couple of times reading it. Anyway, this is interesting. This is called The Witches of Worm. Again, this cover is a little bit too modern for my liking, but this was the only copy I could find. I only read this last year, actually, I think. Or was it this year? And what's interesting about this book is that it was banned from a bunch of college libraries and school libraries because it was felt that it was too disturbing for children and teenagers to read, and potentially even dangerous because it could warp their minds. And it's very subtle, so don't expect it to be on the same level as some of the books that we've been talking about here. But it is pretty unsettling at times if you read it. Put your head on of a teenager in the 70s just reading a book that's made for you, and yet some of the things that the protagonist does in this, you think, wow, this is getting pretty dark. Let me explain the story. I forgot to do that. There's a girl in it called Jessica, and she hates cats, and has never really liked cats, and yet one day she climbs up. There's a big sort of rocky mountain thing behind her apartment where she lives with her mum, and she has a strained relationship with her. And she climbs up into this, she finds this cave in the rock, and she finds there a little cat that she decides to take home because it's cold and wet and needs some loving. But this cat, as it grows, she starts to wonder, has it got some sort of malevolent personality, and does it start telling her to do bad things? Well, the great things about this book is it's a little bit like Roman Polanski's Repulsion, or other films in which you don't know, is the person, or The Innocents, for example, you don't know, is the main protagonist, is she going crazy and it's all in her head, and she's using this as an excuse, the cat as an excuse, or is the cat really malevolent and trying to make her do bad things? So yeah, it's good, and it's a very slow burn. Well, it's a short book, very short and very easy to read. But what I mean is, it's not going to be all-out horror. But I would recommend this to check it out. Or at least, if you've got like a teenage daughter, buy it for her. Or kid, just to see if she goes crazy and kills someone. That was a joke, by the way. Okay, what else have we got next? Oh, yes, the Religion. This is another book that became a film. The Believers. Have you seen The Believers with Martin Sheen, where Martin Sheen is basically, is he an anthropologist or something? I can't remember what his job is, but he's... Oh, give me a fright. A book just fell out. Oh, great. Dennis Wheatley, the Satanic book just fell over. Obviously wants to be heard, but you'll have to wait your turn, Satan. The Religion by Nicolas Condé. It's basically the story of, I think he's an anthropologist in this, and they start finding the body of they find the body of a child in Manhattan, and it'd been ritually kind of messed around with, and this starts to unveil that there's this weird cult, a Santeria cult, which is apparently a real cult in America. And the idea of this is like, imagine in the 20th century in New York City, that most modern of places, that like an ancient cult, an ancient religion is making people sort of sacrifice human beings so that they could get a good job and all that sort of stuff. I enjoyed reading this. It was actually quite an influence on my own novels, which are about a guy called Matt Hunter who investigates religiously motivated crimes. So there was an influence there from this. But I enjoyed the film as well. But basically, it's just into the innermost circles of voodoo and the rites and the secrets, and it was tied in at the time with The Exorcist, because anything sort of religiously horror made a lot of waves, and so this is from the same publishers as The Exorcist. So yeah, it's not as seminal, obviously, as The Exorcist, but right, okay, here's your turn. This is I'm going to show you the back of this book first, because this picture scared me to death when I used to look at it when I was younger. Look at that. There was always something about goat's heads and all that sort of thing that freaked me out. So this was I enjoyed this one. This is Dennis Wheatley. He's written obviously loads and loads of different books, and some of his films. The Devil Rides Out. That's an amazing horror movie with Christopher Lee playing a hero for a change. But in this one, The Haunting of Toby Jugg. It's basically it's almost, it reminds me a little bit of Stephen King's Misery, but before Misery was written, where there's this poor guy, and he's sort of stuck in a bed for ages, while sort of spiders are crawling around on his face and stuff, because he can't move, and I can't. It's a while since I've read this, so I can't fully remember why he's in the bed. I think he might be a soldier or something. Anyway, but as he's in this bed, he's starting to suspect that the people around him are part of some satanic conspiracy, and that's what the Dennis Wheatley books are all about. It's it's saying there is devil worship at work in Britain and across the world, and they're going to reclaim the world for the Prince of Darkness, the Prince of the World. And The Haunting of Toby Jugg is just another enjoyable outing into that universe. Okay, next up, what do we have? Richard Lehman, The Cellar. Richard Lehman, you may not have heard of him, I don't know, but most people who read horror would have heard of Richard Lehman. He was very prolific and wrote a whole bunch of different novels. And I think this might be his first novel, I'm not sure, but it's part of a series of books that were to do with something called The Beast House. The Beast House trilogy, I think it was. And basically there's this visitors kind of flock to come and see this thing called the Beast House, which was an old house where people were murdered supposedly by some sort of weird monster in the past. And so it becomes like a haunted attraction, a sort of scare attraction that people come to see. But nobody is allowed to go in there after dark, because if you go in after dark, then the monster will come out and get you. It's a slightly clunky idea at first, and yet it's quite a fun book. So hang on, I say fun. That's probably not the right word. The idea of the beast house is quite fun, but there is a character in this called Roy, who is this kind of paedophile serial killer guy, and he's not a side character, but he's not the main point of the story. But it's just you're reading about the beast house, and then it will jump to a little bit about Roy, and he is just horrible. Like the things he does, and oh man! And watching this through, reading this through kind of clenched teeth and fingers over the eyes, because some of it is just horrible. So bear that in mind. But that shouldn't put you off reading it if you can handle that sort of stuff. But just be warned. It's pretty grotty, and there's it's just Richard Lehman, nice guy, but he had a pretty messed up imagination. But hey, it's horror, and it's supposed to deal with some of the darkest things. So there you go. This is a book called Deathstalker, which was fun. It looks like a slasher book. This is why I bought it. But it is a bit like a slasher, but not quite. Basically, it's like a mob hitman who he is trying to track down a married couple, because they go to a short campus, a campsite, to try and sort of rekindle their failing marriage, and it's a whole they witness something bad, and so he starts chasing them down to kill them. It's all right. I thought it was quite fun. I like the cover really, because it's just so straight up and simple. But what I especially like about this book is the inscription. Deathstalk, a couple's camping trip becomes a marathon run from death. That's what it says on the cover. But look, inside, somebody has inscribed this. And it says to Suzanne for Christmas, 1985. Love from Nan and Granddad. Isn't that lovely? So in 1985, just before Christmas, let's say it was November or December, little old lady and little old man walk into a bookshop and go, what should we get for Suzanne? What about Deathstalk? She likes that sort of thing, doesn't she? A couple's camping trip becomes a marathon run from death, hunted by a hitman. Yeah, let's get her out of that. I love that. I love that kind of loveliness in the midst of all the horror. What have we got left? Oh yeah, speaking of extreme stuff, this is Jack Ketchum. I don't know if you've ever read any Jack Ketchum before, but he's very dark. He doesn't tend to write books about supernatural horror. Instead, he's more like a sort of Texas Chainsaw Massacre style degenerates, or serial killers or nutcases. And in this one, he's really going for it. The author's uncut, uncensored version. Basically, it's a bunch of people go up to a New York editor, retreats to a lonely cabin up in the quiet Maine town beach of Dead River. But nearby, there's this savage human family with a taste of human flesh. I remember reading this novel when I was just tentatively stepping back into the world of horror. As some of you have followed this show before, you'll know that I was really into horror growing up, and then I became a Christian and thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't be into this stuff anymore, so stepped away from it. But then gradually, as I was doing a master's degree in exploring religion and horror, I started thinking, you know what, I think I can, with absolute good conscience, start to reconnect with scary things again. So I read this novel very early on in that journey back into the kind of horror fold, and I remember I took it to a big Christian conference, this thing called the Baptist Assembly, which is me being an ordained Baptist minister. I used to go to that each year, and it was by the seaside, and in Bournemouth I think it was, and between the sessions I would go and have lunch or whatever, and I'd be sitting reading this, and I remember just thinking man, this is getting them going back into horror at the deep end, because there's people biting people's penises off and all that sort of stuff with this, but it's a really if you can handle that sort of thing, it's actually quite a rattling little story. And he also wrote The Girl Next Door, which I've never actually read, but I've been told that is a very, very brutal and hard novel to get through, but there's loads of big fans of it. But Jack Ketchum, Off Season. Well, we're making our way through these books, but I still think there's we need to break it up a little bit so you're not sitting listening to me for too long. So join me in the next episode when we'll be continuing going through, and then we're going to start getting into animals attacking and werewolves and all sorts of crazy stuff. So join me in the next episode when we do that. But until then, don't forget the Flicks the Church Forgot. Follow me on Twitter at Rev Peter Laws, at peterlaws.co.uk and all the normal places. And yeah, see you soon. Bye.